Hey there everyone, this is Jordan and welcome back to my YouTube channel Teaching in Tiaras. Today's video is going to be me giving you a review on a book that I've spent the last couple days reading, and it's one that I would highly recommend for all teachers. The book is this one. It's Notice and Note Strategies for Close Reading by Kylene and Robert Probst. Like I said, in a nutshell, I would highly recommend this book to anybody teaching any discipline, not just reading, because we know that reading instruction doesn't just stop in the reading classroom. It goes over into math, it goes to social studies, it goes to science, and these authors have concisely and practically put all of their ideas for creating close readers and independent readers into one very, as you can see, handy resource. So this video is going to be taking place in 4 sections. The first section that you are going to see in this video is a brief summary of what you would learn in this book if you were to pick it up on Amazon.com or if you were to pick it up in your local bookstore. You can just as easily look at the table of contents, but I'm going to spell it out for you right here in section number 1. Section number 2. Section number 2 is going to be a brief summary of some of the author's opinions on different topics regarding education. I'll talk about what rigor is to them. I will talk about what close reading is to them and what that entails. I'll even touch on Common Core. So again, section number 2 is going to be a little bit of a summary on the author's opinions on those particular topics. The third section in this particular video is the signposts. If you are familiar with the Notice and Note strategies already, then you already know what the signposts are. If you are not familiar with Notice and Note, I will definitely go over what the signposts are and how they are applicable to your classroom, and I'll be giving a brief description of all 6 of them in section number 3. And last but not least, section 4 of this video is going to be my personal review of the Notice and Note book. I'll be talking about some of the points of the book that I thought were especially strong and some of the points that I thought were a little weaker. I'm going to be kind of reviewing my personal investment in this book and why I'm even doing this review in the first place, why am I even reading this in the first place, and I'm going to be especially talking about some things that really stuck with me and some things that I plan to do in my classroom to implement these close reading strategies by Kylene and Robert. So I hope you enjoy this video, and let's get started with section number 1. In the Notice and Note book, you'll find that the authors have laid out all of the information they want for you to learn in a very teacher-friendly manner. It's very practical and it's very reasonable. As I already said, I've gotten through this book in about a couple days. So I've narrowed it down to basically 9 major things that the authors want for you to take away from the book. So here's just a quick summary of what you'll learn if you were to pick this book up at your local bookstore. So the first thing that you will learn is the role of fiction in our lives. The second thing that you will learn is basically the role of classroom talk or discourse and how it helps students or hurts students depending on the type of talk that it is. You will also, along with that, number 2, will learn the 2 different types of talk, the definitions of monologic and dialogic discourse. You will learn the author's definitions of the 2 big buzzwords in education, rigor and close reading. You will also learn the author's opinions on text-dependent questions. Along with that, number 5, you'll learn about the role of Common Core and how it plays a part in Notice and Note. Those 2 kind of go together since Common Core is huge on text-dependent questions. Number 6, you will also learn the 6 signposts that the authors created to help students engage in the text, and I'll be giving a brief description of those later on in the video. You will also learn, well, not really learn, you will see model lessons for each of the signposts. You will also see definitely some script in there as well. You will also see examples of assessment for the Notice and Note signpost, which is important to any teacher. And last but not least, number 9, you will see basically a really full appendix full of resources and the model text that the authors used in each of these sample classrooms, and also some teacher-created items to go along with the Notice and Note strategies. So now that I've told you what you're going to expect to see in this book, let's get on to section number 2, where I basically summarize the author's opinions and viewpoints on some of the big buzzwords in education. Hey, so before we begin section 2, it is worth it for you guys to note as viewers that I am going to do my very, very best to save my personal opinions about the strategies in this book until the end of this video. Section number 2 is basically going to be me summarizing the author's viewpoints. I'm not going to be interjecting my opinions or anything like that, so everything that I do say here comes straight from the Notice and Note book. Again, I'll be saving my opinions until the very end of the video, so enjoy! Kylene and Robert start out their Notice and Note book with a talk about fiction and how it is very, very powerful. Fiction, Kylene says, lets us be more, whereas nonfiction lets us learn more. Fiction, according to these authors, is how we interact with text at a very, very young age. We come to school reading poetry and picture books, and as we grow with the genre itself, we change ourselves intellectually and mentally and socially, and it continues to change how we interact with people and how we respond to certain situations. These authors believe that students fail to authentically interact with the text and respond to the text. Today's students, according to them, are kind of passive and mindless and sit there idly after they have finished reading a text. And if they don't get it or if they don't know something, they rely on teachers, us, who rush to their aid in order to help them comprehend something instead of letting them struggle a little bit and talk with others about their thoughts. So, according to these authors, readers themselves help create the meaning of a text and help create a reason to read a text at all, which is where the problem lies. The two authors go on to talk about two of the biggest buzzwords in education history to date. Number 1, rigor, and number 2, close reading. To them, rigor is not defined by the level of struggle a student has reading a hard text. Just because a text is hard does not make it rigorous. According to them, rigor is defined as the level of energy put into a text by a reader. It's basically the level of engagement that a reader experiences while reading a text. It's a transaction, basically, and the student wonders, okay, well, what am I going to get out of this text for the level of energy and effort that I'm putting into it? So that kind of goes hand in hand with close reading as well. Close reading needs some sort of interaction between the text itself and the reader. So the authors also clarify that rigorous reading is synonymous with finding what the words on a page mean to the reader. They believe that words on a page are kind of just words on a page until a reader comes along with his or her own biases and values and prior knowledge and experiences and gives those words kind of a life of their own that's relevant to the reader himself or herself. In this way, both of the authors are kind of emphasizing the value of text-to-self connections and reflections as a vehicle for creating authentic questions that come from students. In this way, they're kind of also casting aside text-dependent questions that might come from teachers or our study guides, whose answers kind of live within the four confines of a book. The authors of this book believe that, yes, texts should get harder as the year goes on, and they believe that a critical step in order to achieve that goal is classroom talk. So they go on to define two different types of talk that we see in classrooms, one more so than the other. The first type of talk is monologic talk. And we've all done it, we've all seen it. It is teacher-driven, where the student kind of becomes a passive recipient of the knowledge. There is one right answer, and teachers often ask questions of students in order to just check for their comprehension. Whereas dialogic talk, which is the second type of talk, the teacher and the student become co-constructors of knowledge, and the student has equal or sometimes even more input than the teacher does, which they kind of tend to see as all-knowing if we solely rely on monologic talk. Now, the authors do say that yes, there is a time and a place for monologic discourse, but that we should be relying more on dialogic discourse, so that the students see their questions and their inputs as authentic and more relevant to their lives. This leads me to the third part of my video, about the signposts. The authors offer some strategies so that students will be coming up with those ideas and those questions on their own. So not only do they see themselves as the co-constructor of knowledge, they also kind of are able to relate the text a little bit easier to their own personal lives. Here in section number 3, we're going to be talking specifically about the signposts that the authors have created in order to increase student engagement in a text. So signposts are basically moments within a fictional text that beg the readers to stop and notice that moment and take note about its significance. So this is not to be confused with teachers actually teaching skills such as predicting or visualizing or compare and contrast or summarizing, etc. Students, according to these authors, kind of seem to do that automatically when a part of the book triggers kind of like an emotional response. And that's how they created these signposts. They go over a bunch of different criteria that the signposts have to meet, which I'm not going to go over here. But they also say that it's not enough that the students just notice the signpost. Oh, hey, there it is. They have to do something with it. And so, along with the signpost, both of the authors have created one anchor question for each signpost that the students are supposed to discuss and answer with their peers as they come across the signpost itself. The first signpost that students might come into contact with while reading a piece of literature is called Contrasts and Contradictions. So this moment, students will stop whenever they notice a character's thoughts or actions contradict what they would normally expect to happen. We see it in everyday life, and it can also apply to settings and different events, not just characters. The authors say that once students notice this signpost, they should ask themselves, why would a character act or feel this way? Not only does it help with kind of visualizing and predicting actions, it also helps with inferring as well. The second signpost that students might notice while reading a piece of fiction is called an aha moment. This denotes a character's sudden understanding of an internal conflict. So there it is, internal conflict. The authors suggest that we should ask ourselves when students notice this moment, how might this realization change things? The third signpost that students might come into contact with reading a piece of literature is called Tough Questions. And as its name suggests, this signpost is when a main character asks himself or herself tough life questions. And so when you see those, and they're pretty easy to notice most of the time, the authors say that students should ask themselves, what does this question make me wonder about? The fourth signpost that students may notice in a piece of literature is called Words of the Wiser. You might be able to guess that this particular signpost is a moment in which an older or wiser character kind of imparts some sort of wisdom or life advice to the main character, which also reveals the theme of the story. So the authors think that we should ask ourselves, what was the life lesson and how did it affect the main character? The fifth signpost that students might come into contact with is called Again and Again. And we see this all the time. It is when a particular word or idea or situation is repeated over and over again. And it begs the question, why might the author want to bring this up over and over again? The last signpost, number 6, is called a memory moment, also known as, to us, the flashback. So the flashback reveals background about the character and kind of tells us about sometimes their internal conflicts. And then the authors of this notice and notebook would like for students to ask themselves, why might this memory be so important? So that was a really brief overview of each of the signposts. In order to learn more about those signposts, there's a couple YouTube videos floating around out there about that goes more in depth about each of the signposts. But what you should have noticed is that each of the questions that the students are required to ask themselves when they come across a signpost sends them directly back into the text. We are still satisfying the fact that we need to find text evidence in order to support our answers. So it also encourages, on the other hand, personal responses and authentic responses from the students. Also, when teaching these signposts, and the notice and notebook goes over all of that, the authors implore teachers to use what they call generalizable Generalizable language. Generalizable language prevents teachers from, let's say you're reading something aloud and you stop to model something for the students. The generalizable language prevents teachers from taking note of, let's say, character A in text A and kind of not telling the students why they noticed that. So it kind of prevents students from transferring their knowledge from text A to text B. I know that was kind of confusing, but generalizable language kind of helps teachers tell why each signpost is important and why students are actually stopping to notice it. So again, that is kind of part of the scripted language that you'll find in the Notice and Note book, which I highly recommend that you purchase and see for yourself. So in section 4 of this video, I do promise it is the last section, I'm going to be talking about my review of the book. I am not a professional reviewer, I will make that disclaimer right this second, and so my review to you may seem a little vague, but I am basically going to sing the praises of this book and talk a little bit about my personal investment in why I'm kind of reading this book at all and how I plan to implement it in my classroom. So my personal investment kind of starts last year. There were some conversations early on in the year that we were going to be using Notice and Note as a strategy for close reading at my school. It never took flight, and I'm kind of thankful that it didn't, because my biggest thing that I dislike is when something big comes up at like a professional development or sitting in our collaboration groups and they're like, yes, we should use this right now. And I'm like, no, I don't have time. Or no, I haven't done research on it. I haven't looked at it. And so this summer has really been an opportunity for me to look into the Notice and Note book and really kind of digest it and mark it and look at all of the things that I think are possibilities that'll come out of this book. So I'm really thankful that it did not take flight last year because the summertime is kind of the time where I take to learn the best new strategies. So my personal struggle with reading has kind of influenced why I have taken to this book so quickly. I've been a reading teacher for 3 years and I'm starting my 4th year this coming August, and I have really struggled to engage all the readers in my classroom and implement some sort of plan that mashes well with my county expectations and the Common Core state standards, which is always a struggle. And so I've done county guided reading. That's what the county expects, like 3 to 4 group rotations, and I've tried the Daily 5 and different aspects of that and trying to make all of those things work until finally, I just said, screw it all and find something that works. So I'm really interested in the Notice and Note strategies because I really honestly do think that I can see these working inside my classroom. So in my opinion, getting to my opinion, the authors give a really, really concise, practical, and idyllic view of what teaching and learning reading should be. I really appreciated the teacher friendliness. The book moved at a really nice clip, and I think that the authors did a nice job of basically putting their opinions and combining them with research-based practices and research-based conclusions. Something else I really appreciated about the Notice and Note book is that both of the authors started out the vast majority of their chapters talking about problems that teachers might see with implementing Notice and Note. Teachers might say, oh, well, we have this problem in the classroom, we have underachievement, we have students who say I don't know too quickly, or students who finish and sit there idly. And so the authors really start out with basically the doubts that teachers might have, and then they move pretty slowly and pretty smoothly into, okay, well, here's how we can fix those problems. So I really appreciated that, because us as teachers, or at least this is me, my first gut reaction to something new is, oh my gosh, it's not going to work because this, and this. So the authors did a really nice job at kind of just pacifying those fears and saying, actually, it really can work, and here's how. Something I also found very useful about this book was that during the signpost lessons in the middle of the book, well, actually it's at the end of each chapter, the authors kind of do like an FAQ, a frequently asked questions. So after each signpost lesson, you'll see in italics basically different questions that teachers might have. So basically a lot of the questions that teachers might ask already are addressed in the signpost lesson section of the book, which I thought was really helpful. Another positive about the Notice and Note Signpost book is the appendix. The appendix is probably at least 1/5 of the book, so it's pretty substantial, but you will see in the appendix a bunch of different charts created by the authors of this book, and you'll also see charts that were created even by teachers. So all of these charts are very, very useful, and you could easily modify them to any grade. It's got different rubrics, and it's got different, definitely even something cooler was that it had practices for you as a teacher to try looking at the signpost yourself. It has lists of books that would be, let's say, recommended for different grades, and it even has the sample texts that the authors used in those sample classrooms as well. So towards the end of the book, something that I found especially useful was just the last page. The last page looks like this, and it says up here that classroom charts are the key, and it gives you all of the signpost charts that teachers have used, or I think this is actually one particular teacher made all of these. So it was very helpful to see a visual of what those anchor charts should look like and how we should use those in the classroom as well. The only thing that I found a little strange about the Notice and Note book was that early on, I think in the first or second chapter, the authors make some sort of note about different types of reading. And when I say that, I mean reading in a book versus reading on electronics. And I thought that was a little bit strange just because they never kind of came back to address the difficulties or the benefits of reading on an e-reader such as a Nook or a Kindle or something like that. It seemed to be kind of a standalone thing. You know, I have my own opinions about reading on technology versus reading in books, but it didn't seem to go anywhere, and so I wasn't quite sure of the purpose of talking about different types of reading in that way if, you know, there wasn't going to be any talk about reading on technological devices later on in the book. So I just thought that that was a little strange, and that's really kind of the only weak point that I noticed throughout the entire book. Overall, I would have given it a 5 stars if I had reviewed it on Amazon, which I probably still should and still may, but I was a really big fan of this book, and when I said it in the beginning, I really meant it. I believe that teachers in grades 3 up through 12 should really take a look at this book and try to implement some of the strategies in their classroom. A big plan that I have for this year that I kind of want to use to revitalize my reading instruction is using a lot more literature in the classroom. I unfortunately have a curriculum map that really, how's the best way to put it? It really just goes too fast. And I think a lot of teachers can identify with the fact that we're just trying to push so much information into these poor children that they don't even get an opportunity to work with and struggle with and talk about one text. I realize the importance of comparing text to text, but seriously, if you're working at like that fast of a clip, then you're going to have a problem with any of those skills. So something that I really want to implement this year is the use of literature, novels in the classroom with both of my classes. I have a talented and gifted class and a comprehensive class as well. So I think that choosing the right novels, of course, and giving them some choice as well will really help with their engagement in my reading class. So I think that the Notice and Note strategies, from the impression that I got, is that they kind of work mostly with novels, and I'm in a situation where unless I implement those novels, the students don't get really an opportunity to read longer texts. It's text from a textbook, basically. And so I'm really interested to see how these strategies fit in with much shorter texts. They do offer some strategies, the authors do offer some strategies that students can use with shorter texts as well in this book, but I'm really curious to see if the signposts will work with, you know, those county prescribed texts as well. I know they'll work with the literature that I have planned. I mean, some of those books that I plan to use are actually on the list of books that are in the notice and note. So I'm fairly confident that those signposts will work there. But again, I am interested to see if they will work with the shorter texts that I have planned, well, planned for me, really, in the county curriculum. So that's kind of how deeply I've thought about using them in my classroom. Not too much lately, but as we get closer to the school year and I have a chance to talk about it more with my colleagues, I'm sure that we will come up with a bunch of different ideas. So that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this review, or at least that it was helpful. Make sure to hop on Amazon or wherever and get your copy so that you can read it in full. And if you have any comments, make sure you put them down below and I will respond to them as soon as I possibly can. So I'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining me and have a great 4th of July weekend. See you later.